All right, so hi guys. So this is we're just going to sort of run through the end of chapter 8 since we were not going to have class when I thought we were supposed to have class and then I forgot that we weren't going to be able to. So we're just going to run through the end of the stuff that we didn't get to before you have to write your exam this week. So we were talking about Marxism, and so the last sort of piece of this is peacemaking criminology, which is one of those thinking outside of the conflict box sort of applications. So peacemaking criminology is about, the purpose of peacemaking criminology is to promote peace. It's about promoting a peaceful, just society. So rather than retribution, it's about fixing problems that have been done. And so the inspiration from peacemaking criminology definitely comes from religious and philosophical teachings. So that's kind of the basis of it, but it is not necessarily, based in religion or anything anymore. That's the inspiration, but really all it is it says that punishing and controlling crime, when we just try to focus on punishment and control, it actually makes things worse. It makes people more likely to reoffend. And that is absolutely the case. When we talk about sentencing, the hard on crime, tough on crime sort of approaches, they increase recidivism rather than decrease it. So a peacemaking criminology perspective advocates mediation, conflict resolution rather than prison. So it's about fixing the problem and really dealing with the issue that caused the crime to happen in the first place, rather than simply doling out punishment and then hoping that they learn their lesson. So a term that hopefully at least some of you are familiar with is restorative justice, which is a big part of peacemaking criminology. And so the tenets of restorative justice, first of all, it addresses victim harm and the needs of victims. So it's about, when we look at the criminal justice system, it tends to be very offender focused. It's about, we have to punish the offender. We have to, make sure that they do these programs or whatever. And it's about what the offender needs or what society needs for the offender. But restorative justice is about, the victim is important too. So we need to address the harm that has been done to the victim and what the victim needs. And it also very much is about holding offenders accountable. So restorative justice is not just about, let's all hold hands and sing Kumbaya. It is about accountability. It's about, you have caused this problem, and so you have to be part of the solution to fix it. And so it involves not just the offenders, the way that sort of the offender-focused criminal justice system is, but also the victims, but then also the surrounding communities, because crime doesn't just harm those directly involved in it, it also harms the community where we see crimes happening. So communities are part of the restorative justice process as well. And so the core tenet of restorative justice is that we have respect for everybody, because everybody is human, and so we want to respect the humanity that is in even the offenders. So it's about remembering that they're still human, and so they still need to be treated as human. And if we want them brought back to our community, they have to be treated the way that they're going to be most successful coming back to the community. So it's about respect for everybody involved, and respect for the community who is affected by the crime, and respect for the victim, and making sure that everybody is involved in fixing the problem. So there's also a video that you can watch that I'll put the link up in your module. It's about it's sort of a restorative justice in practice, where they talk about youth courts, so it's pretty cool. And if we were a lecture, I would show it at this point. So you can check that out. And so another kind of restorative justice is reintegrative shaming. So shame is a powerful, powerful tool. And so it can be very effective in terms of informal social control, meaning that it's not like going to be formalized in the sense of, you need to go through so much shame as your sentence, but it's an informal tool that is very, very powerful. People do not like to feel shame for them, something that they've done, or to feel shame for themselves. So it can be very, very powerful, but it can come about in two different ways. So the first way it can be used is sort of in a stigmatizing way. And so this is through a process of degradation, where the offender is branded an evil person, and then they're cast out of society because, what you have done is so shameful, you can't be part of society anymore, and, you're a terrible person. That is sort of the easier way to use shame and kind of the way that a lot of societies do, but it's not very effective. All it does is shun the person, make them probably more likely to be resentful and then commit more crimes. But restorative justice has sort of taken that strong, powerful tool of shame and used it in a more effective way through reintegrative shaming. So this is where the shame itself is extended to the behaviors, to the poor choices that the offender has made. So it is not about shaming the person, it's about shaming the act. And that's very, very different, because the person themselves, they are still respected as a person, they are still human, and it's about working to bring that person back to be a functioning member of society and to be part of society again. And so we want societal reacceptance, because then those people, if they're part of society again, they're going to help the community rather than be more likely to be committing more crimes. So the reintegrative shaming uses the power of that shame tool, but it's directed towards the act, not the person. And that's the difference. And so to be truly reintegrative, shaming has to be brief and controlled. So there has to be a controlled environment that this happens in. And then typically this is followed by some kind of ceremony of forgiveness, apology, repentance on behalf of the offender. And so it's about, okay, we have dealt with this problem. Now it's over. You are welcome back into society as long as you don't make those poor choices again. We have fixed the problem, and we've dealt with that, so now let's move on, is essentially kind of how the reintegrative shaming works. And then the idea of restoration is also important in restorative justice, because restoration is about fixing the harm that was caused. And so from an RJ perspective, it really redefines crime, because it's about conflict between the offender, the victims, but then also everybody else who has been affected by the crime. So it's about the families of the offender and the victims. It's about schools that may have been affected, the surrounding community that certainly is affected by higher or lower rates of crime. So restoration then is about, we want a resolution to address the conflict that happened. So we want it about the content of that conflict. So what caused that conflict, but also the surrounding context. So what other factors were relevant that led up to that conflict. And so let's figure out what caused this problem, essentially. So to be effective, restoration, the offender has to admit the harm caused. That's a big part of it, because these things don't work if you have offenders who are saying that either pleading innocence or, using some of those techniques of neutralization that we talked about from Sykes and Matsey, saying, oh, well, it's not my fault, or no one was really hurt. If they don't admit that they did this harm, that they caused this harm, these things don't work. So RJ doesn't work for everybody. It's not appropriate for everybody, but where it does work, it's very effective. So if you have a case where the offender is saying, yes, I admit I did this thing and it hurt these people, then you can move forward. And so this process has to be a healing process rather than a retributive process. So it's not about punishment, it's about fixing the harm caused. That's the different focus. The offender also has to have a stake in the community, because the offender has to have ties to people, and he or she has to care about people in the community or whatever the social group is, because otherwise they're not gonna care about accepting responsibility and about showing remorse or working to repair any of the injuries that were caused by the crime. So without those ties to the community, this also won't really work that well. So the offender has to care about the people in the community and want to be part of it again. And then the offender also has to commit. They have to commit to, whatever restitution that the group agrees upon, they're going to do that, whether it's monetary restitution or labor of some kind. So, let's fix property damage, or let's pay hospital bills, whatever the restitution is, the offender is committed to that. And then also to the reparation, which is the apology itself. The offender has to be committed to that too, to say, that they are truly sorry and that they do want to change and to not have to make these decisions again in the future and to make better decisions in the future. So some restoration-focused programs that are out there, sentencing circles are sort of very common within some Native communities, and these include community members, victims, elders, criminal justice system agents, and so these are very common within certain Native communities, but they're used elsewhere as well. That's just kind of where these came from. But basically each member then gets their chance to say, to have their say about the damage that was done and how it can be repaired. And then the offender has a chance to express remorse, to work towards fixing the problems that were caused by the crime, and then towards forgiveness and reacceptance. So sentencing circles really give a chance for everybody to have their say. And then you have school diversion programs. These are much more appropriate for students who are committing kind of minor crimes, so things like drug or alcohol use, petty theft, things like that. So these school diversion programs it's about working to improve relationships to key community figures, provide mentorship. And so it's kind of related to some of those things we talked about in the labeling, when we talk about labeling, because it's about not putting them through the criminal justice system and also increasing the community bonds. When we talked about the Hershey social bond, so it's about the attachment, commitment, involvement, belief, those things. So it's about sort of addressing that from a different stance rather than just putting them through juvie or the criminal justice system. Community policing is another big one. So this is where policies are affected by input from the community. So the big part of this is that it works proactively rather than reactively. So it's not about, well, how do we fix this problem or this crime that happened, but it's about, well, here are the issues we have in our community that may lead to crime. How do we go about fixing those? So community policing is very proactive and it can be very effective. Again, though, it only works in communities where everybody's on board and people are willing to work with the police and the police are willing to work with the people. And you also have diversion in the courts, which is kind of similar to the school diversion programs, except it's sort of for adults more so. But this is encouraging things like victim offender reconciliation programs and mediation, conflict resolution. So remember we talked about the victim offender reconciliation programs back in like chapter 3. Those are very much RJ programs because it's about having everybody have their say and be able to talk things out and fix the problems. And then we have circles of support and accountability. This is something that I've worked with personally for a lot of years, both in Vancouver and Ontario. It did start in Canada, but it's moving into some of the northern states and it's in Australia. But it's basically where you have your core member, which is a released sex offender. And so typically they've been in prison for a good number of years, sometimes a few decades. And so they come out and you have your core member and you have your circle around them, which is 4 or 5 community members. And so this is a program about support. So it's about like helping find housing and things like that and a job and show them how to use the internet. But also the accountability side. So, you have your weekly meetings or sometimes more often than that. But it's about, what did you do this week? Did you talk to people you're not supposed to talk to? Did you look at pornography, right? So things like that you can then address those problematic behaviors before they lead to criminal behavior. So COSA is very effective. It has, I'm pretty sure, pretty close to 100% success rate. But it's, again, one of those things that the offender has to be on board. The offender has to say, yes, I did these things, and I want my behavior to change. And that's kind of a criticism for restorative justice in general, is that it doesn't work for all crime or all offenders. And often it's difficult to balance the needs of the victim and the offender because it's tough to get a win-win situation for some crimes. But there is a lot of potential for a lot of offenders. So the biggest thing is that as long as the offender is on board and saying that they want to change and that they accept responsibility, that's the biggest thing. Once you have that, then you can likely work something with restorative justice. But so that's it. So let me know if you have any questions, and also for the exam, your review is also going to be up in the exam tab the way it always is. So go ahead and play that on your own. And let me know if you have any questions before the exam as well.